First off, the title is wrong as it should be called Suicide Squad. But I guess they wanted everyone to know that this was related to the Batman Arkham video games. This fact definitely isn't revealed in any way in the movie itself.
Everybody, shut up.
Anyway, this was bad. Like, really, really bad for the first 45 minutes of its 75-minute runtime.
Honorless, rudderless, undisciplined. They'll never find your body.
The writing is just awful. The humor is equally terrible. There's far too much exposition, and characterization just goes out the window whenever the plot demands it. The plot itself feels like they're pulling random tropes out of a hat. Oh, and whoever made this really wanted to sexualize the hell out of Harley Quinn. Also, she and Deadshot start sleeping together, which doesn't make any sense in this or any other property. It just happens.
We're finished, you and me! I got someone new now. Someone better.
But this terrible movie suddenly changes in the last half hour when it metamorphosizes into something amazingly good. I don't know if I've ever seen a film that makes such a sudden leap in quality. It goes from being a boring exposition festival to an action-packed thrill ride filled with the superhero stuff I assume most people want in their superhero movies. This ending almost makes up for the terrible beginning. Almost. It's not a movie. It's 4 completely separate short films. I considered ignoring everything but the Superman Shazam story, just as the people who titled this movie did, but they are all presented together so they will be reviewed the same way, I suppose. Also, it would have the same place on this list either way. Anyway, the first film is The Return of Black Adam, and it's the longest of the 4. Then each one is named after the hero it showcases: the Spectre, Green Arrow, and Jonah Hex. The Superman Shazam one feels like a pilot episode. It goes through Shazam's origin story. It has really good action and excellent animation, but the story itself is a bit bland, and Black Adam just shows up and likes smashing things more or less, so they kind of brush over anything that makes his character interesting in the comics to make him just a generic evil dude. The Spectre feels like they animated an old-timey noir radio show and threw in a bunch of horror tropes. So that one's amazing, and my obvious favorite of the 4. The next is Green Arrow, which has almost no story at all, and instead is just 20 minutes of action. It's definitely entertaining, but also the most forgettable. The last, Jonah Hex, is a how-catch a mystery that's also a western and is amazingly good, especially considering it's only about 10 minutes long. So all of these stories are pretty good, except the Spectre one, which is a masterpiece. But they all feel like stories half-told, like only the beginning or the middle of their individual stories, and we're missing pieces of a larger puzzle. Though fairly entertaining, a movie these do not make. This film isn't terrible. It's got a colorful cast of characters, the voice acting is pretty great all around, the animation isn't amazing, but it does do a few things that are pretty neat. I rather like the action too. Something this film gets that many on this list haven't so far is that fights feel more awesome when they have depth to them. For example, Sinestro isn't just another generic villain running around punching people. This feels like a real betrayal with personal motivation behind it, and makes the audience that much more invested when fists start flying. What I'm saying is that this movie does its action sequences very well by adding these layers to it. The problem with this movie is only one thing, but it's something that brings the whole movie down. It's Hal Jordan himself, and the problem is that he's a Mary Sue.
And then there's the smell.
A Mary Sue, if you didn't know, are characters who are meant to be perfect. They're naturally good at everything, everyone likes them. The problems they have are things like they care too much, or they don't know when to quit, or people wish that they weren't replacing their dead friend.
Give them time. You have to understand, Abin Sur, everyone loved him.
For Hal, everything is just handed to him on a silver platter from start to finish. The ring finds him and gives it to him. He's naturally good at using it even without training. He comes in all the time and saves the day, and everyone acts like he's the only one who can save them, even though everyone has power rings. He also has no imagination, but that doesn't matter at all, since whatever he makes is not only good enough, it's better than anything anyone else could have used in that same situation for some reason. There's a part in this movie when his ring is taken away from him, and I thought this was almost interesting for a moment, because at least he would have to try. But it doesn't matter. He easily takes out the bad guys with barely any effort, and he's away scot-free, so he doesn't even need the ring to be so naturally awesome. And then Sinestro gets rid of all the Green Lanterns, all of them, but Hal somehow activates his ring again anyway, and becomes the most powerful Green Lantern ever. The problem with Mary Sue's, outside of them being boring as all hell, is that they don't have to learn anything, or grow as a character, or, most importantly of all, be in any way believable. Nobody's perfect, and characters like these, well, it's impossible to root for someone to win in the end when all they do is win anyway without any effort on their part. This movie would have been a lot better without Green Lantern in it at all. The main character could have been Kilowog. Why not?
You gonna eat that?
Go for it.
Lex Luthor is elected president and declares Superman and Batman criminals, so now every superhero and villain is after them. That's the entire 10-minute plot they stretch out for an hour. They fill the runtime by having action. Lots and lots of action. Why do you need anything else? There's not even a single side story to distract us from the perpetual superhero fights. Oh, I guess there's also a meteor made of kryptonite coming to destroy the Earth, but outside of brief mentions to remind us all this is happening, everyone acts like it's not a huge deal, so it's easy to forget about it as the film goes on. Which is kind of the issue of the entire film. Its story is lacking so much that the entire movie is forgettable, and the focus becomes showing us these over-the-top action sequences with no feeling behind them. Don't get me wrong, it's an entertaining movie, but without much substance, it's also a highly forgettable one. I want to say something, and that's that Watchmen, the graphic novel by Alan Moore, David Gibbons, and John Higgins, is one of my favorite things of all time. So watching this movie, I suffer a mix of emotions. For one thing, it pleases me to see how much was done correctly, and yet greatly disappoints me at how much they got totally wrong. Compliments first.
I hope you're ready, hero.
When you are.
Almost every scene with Rorschach is great, and Jackie Earle Haley's performance as the character feels just like the anti-hero from the comic books.
None of you seem to understand. I'm not locked in here with you. You're locked in here with me!
Same with the comedian, though his part isn't as big as it is in the graphic novel. They at least give us a taste of the complexities of the character. Also, Night Owl and Silk Spectre are okay. They aren't great, but they also don't totally suck either. Though I absolutely hate this sex scene. Ugh, I get it. You can only bang in costumes. You don't have to show it in slow motion for 10 minutes while also ruining a perfectly good song at the same time. Okay, I guess I switched to complaints there. But now, the thing they get the most wrongest is Dr. Manhattan. Though he was an emotional being in the comics, Zack Snyder seems to have translated that into him being some sort of prissy man-child who runs away to Mars the moment he thinks he might have been the cause of other people's cancer. Though this does happen in the comic, it's revealed later on exactly what happened and just how far Ozymandias' plan goes into depth. Also, they take out some of the cooler parts with Doc Manhattan and basically sum it up in a single sentence.
That you are in fact a god, given that you see the past and the future simultaneously.
I can only see my own past, my own future.
Ozymandias, by the way, is fine, but just like Manhattan, he feels more like a sheltered prissy boy than the high-functioning businessman slash ninja we get in the comics. And the biggest problem of the movie, really, is the ending. And it's not that they change it from being a giant fake alien to being Dr. Manhattan. That's fine. It's that the last half hour or so is just bogged down entirely with way too much exposition. I know they can't show us like they do in the comics, but having everything explained and then argued, and then Manhattan and Laurie show up and they talk and argue some more, and then finally Manhattan finally kills Rorschach. Oh, that's one change from the comic that I actually appreciated was Night Owl's reaction to Rorschach's death. In the comics, it originally occurs off screen, and Night Owl and Laurie just carry on like nothing happened. Here we get a visceral response to the whole event, and that's pretty cool. As a whole, the film is a mixed bag, but by no means a terrible experience. This is one of those movies that says, screw everyone's tragic backstory, let's just start with the Legion of Doom trying to destroy the world.
Now is the hour. We set into motion cataclysmic change to the planet. The Legion of Doom shall rule in a new world order.
And that's all the introduction we need. After that, it then jumps forward 1,000 years so the Karate Kid can finally get another sequel.
Our apologies. Karate Kid knows not his own strength.
I think the front door was locked.
But this movie doesn't waste any of its 50-minute runtime telling its convoluted story. In fact, it's basically a movie that's nothing but action sequences and plot points. Because of this, they don't spend any time at all developing characters, though we do spend a lot of time with Karate Kid and Dawnstar. They're basically just exposition machines.
We're from the future. The 31st century? 1,000 years from now?
The one you know as Lex Luthor had been discovered in the year 2856.
Because of that, the depth that makes battles meaningful is mostly missing in this movie. However, the action throughout the movie is all really cool. It's stylized and well choreographed, or whatever you call it when it's animated. The plot this movie focuses almost entirely on is also a pretty good one, though it expects you to know who everyone is right away. Furthermore, the humor, though a tad corny, made me laugh several times throughout the film. It's all style over substance and fairly short, but still a pretty entertaining movie. This is one of those movies that fails in one of its 3 acts. You see, most movies follow the 3-act structure. The beginning or first act, where you introduce characters and get the story moving, the middle or second act, where things get more exciting, and the end, or third act, where the movie has its climax. And you can usually tell where one act ends and the other begins because that's where something changes the story completely. Such as here when Mr. Freeze kidnaps Barbara Gordon. The problem is, everything before this happens is incredibly slow and uninteresting. I like that it focuses on Mr. Freeze during these parts and makes him feel like the main character, but they don't really do anything that exciting with it. To make matters worse, it feels like the film is just stretching out maybe 3 minutes of story into the first third of the movie. However, once the real story of Mr. Freeze kidnapping Batgirl finally starts, this becomes a pretty good movie with a ticking clock that has Batman and Robin racing to find her before Mr. Freeze steals all of Barbara's organs to save his wife's life. What? That's what he's doing. First off, I want to say something that just bugs me every time it happens in any piece of fiction. If someone gets an electrical shock while you're touching each other, it will also shock you at the same time with the same amount of force. Electricity doesn't discriminate. Your body is not a closed circuit. And here, even if Nightwing's costume is insulated, like you could argue what Robin's suit is later on, in the movie when it happens again, Cheetah is still grabbing him by the head. I mean, shocking someone in a movie rarely does more than knock them back anyway, but just still annoys me whenever this happens. Pet peeve out of the way, this is a pretty entertaining movie. Like JLA Adventures, it doesn't really concentrate on characters as much as it does story. And like the other Batman Unlimited movies, the focus is obviously just to showcase and sell toys. It's still a pretty good film with a decent plot, though aspects of it are kind of silly, like all the animal-themed villains joined together. Oh, except instead of Gorilla Grodd, we get Silverback, and then he's a robot later anyway, so who cares? I suppose the biggest issue with the movie is that it's so jam-packed with characters and robots and moments to advertise that it's impossible to take it seriously. It still has good voice acting, animation, action, and a story that, at the very least, doesn't completely fall apart at any time, though it does stretch logic more than a few times. Overall, it's not bad, it's just not anything special. This movie has a bad rap since it did kill Superman live-action movies for over 25 years, but it's actually not half bad.
I do okay or what, Uncle Wax?
Lenny, I've always considered you the Dutch elm disease in my family tree. This time, nephew, you did fine.
I'm not saying it's a masterpiece by any means, but as a campy superhero movie, I found it to be a fairly enjoyable film. Especially the scenes with Lex Luthor and his nephew Lenny, along with the fights between Superman and the man-made villain Nuclear Man, which were pretty decent CGI action sequences for the 80s. As for the problems, well, the major issue is that everything is very silly. It basically throws all real-world and imagined physics out the window whenever it wants to, and doesn't do the best job with making sure the plot makes sense all the time. Still, it has a lot of humor though, both intended and unintended, making this a film that swings back and forth between a decent comedic superhero film and a good bad movie, where we laugh at the movie instead of with it. A few more complaints. At one point, Clark Kent reveals to Lois that he's Superman, basically just to ask advice as to whether or not he should throw all the nuclear weapons into the sun or not. Then he kisses her, which I guess erases her memory. I guess. It doesn't explain this, which I'm sure left a lot of this film's original audience very confused. But this really shows to me, once again, why we should change it so Lois just knows Clark and Superman are the same person from now on until the end of time. The stuff they do to keep it secret is just ridiculous. Oh, also this film spends an awful lot of screen time on the one guy makes a double date with 2 women at the same time trope that was popular on TV at the time but makes for a very strange section of a superhero movie. Overall, it's not terrible, it's just very campy. Not to be confused with the much better Lego Batman movie, this is a direct-to-DVD release that was produced by the folks at TT, the people who make all the Lego video games, and based off their Lego Batman 2 game. Anyway, this is one of those movies that makes you ask, why is everyone made out of Legos? And I don't mean that ironically, but aside from some silly props in the background, the story of this is far too serious for the style. In fact, even the jokes are too serious to be funny.
Sorry to wipe that grin up your face, Joker.
You're not sorry. You're not sorry at all.
This is an odd movie because of this conflict in tone versus style. It feels like someone wrote a serious live-action Batman movie that they decided to make into Legos at the last moment and just shoehorned in some mostly unfunny jokes to compensate. If you can get over this weird contrast, this is actually a pretty good Batman story invoking many heroes and villains from all over the DC universe. It's a good movie, it just doesn't really feel like a Lego movie. One more compliment, the voice acting in this is very good.